Welcome back. We start our news bulletin from the US, where over 1,200 more people have died from COVID-19, increasing the tally to over 94,000. Meanwhile, Brazil reported a record 1,188 deaths in 24 hours, pushing the toll to over 20,000. Worldwide, the death count has exceeded 332,000, with over 5.1 million people infected. More in this report.
Many countries are lifting restrictions as new deaths and the spread of the virus continue to slow. U.S. President Donald Trump says the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will issue guidance for reopening very soon.
I think CDC is going to put something out very soon. I spoke to them today. I think they're going to put something out very soon. We've got to open our churches. People want to go in. I saw a scene today where people are trying to break into a church, to go into the church, not to break in and steal something, to break in. They want to be in their church. I said, you better put it out, and they're doing it, and they're going to be issuing something today or tomorrow.
Over in Australia, New South Wales will ease restrictions allowing cafes, restaurants and pubs to have up to 50 seated patrons. Australia is now asking the UK to exempt its travellers from the 14-day quarantine. Meanwhile, in Scotland, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has outlined a 4-phase incremental plan to ease lockdown restrictions from May 28th.
The lockdown restrictions have been absolutely necessary to mitigate the massive harm caused by the COVID-19 virus. However, the lockdown is creating harms of its own: loneliness and social isolation, deepening inequalities and serious damage to our economy. None of us want it to last any longer than it has to. So today we are setting out the phases in which we will aim to ease lockdown.
Chechny's leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, has been taken to a hospital in Moscow after he started showing symptoms of the coronavirus.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported its worst day in the fight against coronavirus, with the highest single-day deaths and infections so far. The Health Ministry said 50 more people died, while 2,603 tested positive over the last 24 hours. The death toll has risen to 1,067, with the total number of infections at 50,694. The ministry said 15,201 patients have recovered. It said 336 new infections were recorded in Sindh province, 310 in Punjab, and 365 in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Meanwhile, Balochistan reported 39 more cases and the capital Islamabad 12 more. The US says it will withdraw from the Open Skies Treaty, which permits unarmed aerial surveillance flights over member countries. Talking to media in Washington, President Donald Trump accused Russia of repeated violations of the accord. Russia's foreign ministry responded it had not violated the treaty and US withdrawal will be very regrettable. It said the Trump administration is trying to derail all agreements on arms control. Meanwhile, Trump said the US will formally withdraw from the accord in 6 months. The US president later said there is hope for talks in the future.
I think we have a very good relationship with Russia, but Russia didn't adhere to the treaty. So until they adhere, we will pull out. But there's a very good chance we'll make a new agreement or do something to put that agreement back together.
35 nations are party to the treaty, including Russia, Canada, and the UK. The NATO headquarters said it will hold a North Atlantic Council meeting today to address Washington's unilateral decision to withdraw from the pact. Now, in another news, the US has accused China of breaking commitments to keep Hong Kong semi-autonomous. Washington's allegations came after Beijing said it was proposing a new Hong Kong national security law. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortega says Beijing should honor its commitments and obligations in the Sino-British Joint Declaration. The bilateral treaty, signed in 1984, guarantees a high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong until at least 2047. US President Donald Trump also warned of a very strong reaction against an attempt to gain more control over the former British colony. Details of the legislation will be revealed at the Chinese Parliament's annual session today. Now, China has urged the US to cut off military ties with Taiwan and stop selling weapons to the disputed territory. Beijing's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian urged Washington to abide by the One China principle. He said military ties between US and Taiwan will further harm bilateral relations.
中方坚决反对
China firmly stands against U.S. selling arms to Taiwan and has lodged solemn representation to the United States. We urge the U.S. to abide by One China policy and 3 joint communique. Stop arms sales to Taiwan and military contact with Taiwan in order to avoid further damage on U.S.-China relations and Taiwan Strait relations.
以免对中美关系
China says it will not flinch from any escalation in tensions with the United States. Speaking to reporters, a government spokesperson said the U.S. will have much to lose if the trouble between the two countries continues. He said cooperation is the only correct choice and will benefit both. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo rejected President Xi Jinping's claim that Beijing had acted with transparency after the outbreak in China. He said Beijing continues to withhold virus samples and access to facilities in China. Moving on, in Afghanistan, the government says the Taliban have shown zero respect for the peace deal signed with the United States. In a tweet, National Security Council spokesman Javed Faisal said the Taliban have killed 25 people and wounded 89 others this week. The Taliban are yet to comment on the statement. On Wednesday, Taliban leader Haibatullah Akhundzada said the group is committed to the peace deal and asked other sides to respect the agreement. He urged Washington not to waste the opportunity to end America's longest war. Earlier, the Afghan President Ashraf Ghani stressed the need for a ceasefire before the start of intra-Afghan talks. Guatemala's President Alejandro Giammattei has criticized the U.S. for deporting migrants infected with novel coronavirus. In an online talk, Giammattei said the United States has treated Guatemala in an unkind way. President Giammattei said Washington has not even sent a single mask during the pandemic. He said the government does not understand why the U.S. will send flights full of infection. 190 deportees have tested positive for the virus so far, amounting to 5% of the country's cases. In a statement, the U.S. Embassy listed the economic aid it has designated recently for Guatemala. It said Washington is committed to the health and prosperity of the Guatemalan people. The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation says the shooting at Texas Naval Air Station is being investigated as a terrorism act. Earlier, U.S. Navy shot down an active assailant at its Corpus Christi station, which wounded a security force member. FBI Special Agent Leah Greaves said investigators are working to determine whether a second person of interest is at large in the community. She said officials are still working to process the crime scene. In a separate statement, the U.S. Department of Justice said it is working with the FBI and will analyze electronic media found at the scene. The Justice Department did not elaborate on the nature of that electronic media. Palestine has rejected an aid shipment from the United Arab Emirates after it arrived at Israel's Ben Gurion airport. In a news conference, Health Minister Michaela said Palestine refused to receive the medical aid as the Emirati side did not coordinate with them. She said Palestine is a sovereign country and UAE should have spoken to the authorities first. The Emirati flight at Israel's airport marks the first public flight between the two states, despite the UAE not having any official ties with Israel. Meanwhile, Jordan has warned it will review the relationship with Israel over its plans to annex the occupied West Bank. Prime Minister Omar al-Razaz accused Tel Aviv of taking advantage of the coronavirus pandemic to implement its unilateral moves. Japan says it is working to secure the rapid extradition of 2 men arrested in the U.S. in connection with Ghosn's escape. The 2 men are accused of allowing the escape of former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn from the country. Speaking to media, Chief Cabinet Officer Yoshihide Suga said Japan is making preparations for a speedy extradition. Nissan took notice of the extradition proceedings and reserved the right to take further legal measures against Ghosn. It filed a civil suit in Japan seeking $93 million in damages from its former boss for alleged misconduct. China says its defense spending will rise at its lowest rate in 3 decades by just over 6.5% in 2020. The report presented to the parliament said China's defense spending stands at over $178 billion. China's defense budget in 2020 is about a quarter of the U.S. defense budget last year, which stood at $686 billion. In 2018, China announced its largest military budget increase in 3 years at slightly above 8%. Meanwhile, China refrained from setting a 2020 GDP growth target and pledged to step up spending and financing to support its economy. Premier Li Keqiang said due to uncertainty caused by COVID-19, Beijing will prioritize stabilizing employment and ensuring living standards. We're taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. The World Bank has approved $500 million in grants and low-interest loans to help African and Middle Eastern countries fight swarms of desert locusts. In an interview, senior World Bank officials said the Horn of Africa is the epicenter of the pest invasion. Holger Cray said 4 of the hardest-hit countries, including Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda, will get $160 million. He said Yemen, Somalia, and other affected countries could tap funds as needed. Locust swarms have infested 23 countries across East Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. The invasion is being called the worst locust plague in 70 years. In Colombia, the use of drones to contain the COVID-19 pandemic and implement lockdowns has raised concerns about privacy. However, advocates of the technology say it is helping the government save lives. Find out more about this in this report.
Colombian capital Bogota is home to 1/3 of the country's 17,000 COVID-19 cases. Since the pandemic started, drones have become a steady feature of the city's skyline. They're programmed to detect high body temperatures, which has proven invaluable for the government's fight to contain the virus.
Without a doubt, the use of these technologies from the National Police has been very useful in these orange alert areas. These drones that fly from 150 meters on average have the capacity to check people in the street and check their temperature.
Though this strategy has been effective, concerns have been raised about the technology violating citizens' privacy. But there are many citizens who say the use of drones is justified during this pandemic.
I think it is very good for what they're looking for that objective, but if it's for other things, then I wouldn't be comfortable. But I think it's excellent, of course. The more measures taken, the better.
Parts of the country have begun emerging from the lockdown, but the drones are still helping the government keep track of virus hotspots. This is yet another example of technology helping to keep national economies afloat during this pandemic. The coronavirus has killed over 600 Colombians so far.
Despite restrictions and curfew to stem the spread of the COVID-19 outbreak, marketplaces in Afghanistan are overcrowded by shoppers ahead of AL-FITR. More about Eid preparations in this report.
The Afghan government imposed curfew in mid-March to halt the coronavirus spread in the country. Schools and markets were closed, and all sports events and traditional festivals were cancelled. Despite the increase in infection cases and recent surge in violence, Afghans are preparing for traditional Eid. In Mazar-e-Sharif, people thronged an open-air marketplace to purchase dried nuts, sweets, and new clothes for the feast. Though many people are not coming out of their houses due to COVID-19, but still a large number of Afghans have flocked to the market.
The marketplace is very crowded as if there is no coronavirus disease. I came here to buy clothes and shopping. Coronavirus outbreak impacted the market. Despite this, the market is filled by shoppers, even if it is not as much as before. The crowd in the market has increased a lot. It was not like this a few days ago. Even so, many people do not leave their houses due to coronavirus outbreak.
According to the Health Ministry, the number of COVID-19 cases in Afghanistan has climbed to nearly 8,700, with more than 190 deaths.
Asian stock markets are trading lower after tensions between the US and China escalated. This follows China's decision to propose a new national security law for Hong Kong. Hong Kong's Hang Seng has plummeted nearly 5%. Shanghai Composite is trading over 1.5%. Seoul's Kospi has lost over 0.5%. Nikkei 225 is trading 0.75% lower. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.